Chapter 18. Mike returned with Katie to the group, and their family reunion was less than joyful. While Lisa was cold and stiff, the kids acted afraid of their aunt, something Katie, who had always been self-conscious, picked up on immediately. But Mike should have seen that coming. He had lamented enough to Lisa about how mad he was about Katie not showing up for the funeral, and the last time that the kids had actually seen their aunt was at least 5 years ago. They had changed. So had Katie. When Katie finally walked to the back of the truck and saw their mother lying on the blankets that they had brought from the clinic where Nasir had saved her life, Mike saw Katie's first expression of worry. He was glad to see that beneath that hard exterior, she still had a human side, even though she didn't let it come out very often. Once the introductions were finished, Katie led the group up the path and through the woods until they arrived at the cabin. A large patch of land had been cleared, the cabin built from the fallen timber. Aside from the cabin, Mike saw her old Jeep covered beneath a camouflaged tarp out front. The left side of the cabin housed bees and a chicken coop. Pigs occupied the back of the cabin, and the right side housed a small garden. "Do we have to poop outside?" Kelly asked, whispering to her mother. "Well, we'll have to do a lot of things differently now, so it's best if you just get used to it." Lisa placed her arm around her daughter, though Casey had a slightly different outlook than his sister. "It'll be nice to be one with nature," Casey said. "You're such a freak," Kelly replied, rolling her eyes. "Takes one to know one." Before the bickering transformed from childish to out of hand, Mike intervened. "I don't want either of you to get on one another's nerves right now, understand?" Both Kelly and Casey nodded, then sulked away, heads down. But at least they weren't arguing. "You didn't have to snap at them like that," Lisa said. Mike knew she was right, but he didn't have time to sugarcoat things anymore. Just because we're here doesn't mean that we're safe from danger. Lisa stepped closer. "I understand the threat we're facing, Mike, but that doesn't mean we have to lose everything about who we are." She walked around him and joined their children. Mike helped Nasir carry his mother inside, and Katie led them to the spare bedrooms. "You keep an eye on her." Mike turned to his sister. "Where do you keep most of your supplies? We should start putting everything together." Katie raised her eyebrows. "And you know this from your years of survival experience?" "I'm just trying to help," Mike answered. "If you have a better solution, then..." "My solution is that this is my house and my property, and everything that happens here, everything that people touch or use, doesn't happen unless it's with my permission," Katie said. "If you or anyone else that you brought here has a problem with that, then they can leave now." Mike wanted to argue, but he chose to heed his own advice that he gave his children. It was best not to cause a scene if there was nothing to argue about. "You're right, this is your place, and you're the expert in this scenario. We'll do whatever you think is best." "Good," Katie said. "Now, the best thing we can do with supplies is just make sure that we split them up. It's important to have different stores in different areas. That way, if one storage place is compromised, we don't lose all of our supplies." Mike nodded. "That's smart." "I know," Katie said, then glanced back to her mother, who was on the bed, before punching Mike in the arm and stepping out of the room. "Come on, we need to talk." Katie and Mike stepped out of the cabin. Katie shifted her weight from her left foot to her right, then hooked her thumb in her belt loop. It was a telltale sign that she was worried about something. "What's wrong?" Mike asked. "I was going to come and get you," Katie answered. Mike was stunned. It wasn't something he expected to hear. "But there's a reason why I stayed." Katie leaned closer, keeping her voice hushed. "We're not as safe as you think we are up here." Mike frowned. "What are you talking about?" "The town that's nearby?" Katie asked. "The one where I keep my P.O. box? I think it's some kind of central hub for the people that are responsible for all of this." "How many people do they have?" Mike asked. A lot, and more coming every hour, Katie answered. They've started to send scouting parties out to comb the surrounding areas, but so far, none of them have made it this far north. I don't think they believe anyone would live so far out in the middle of nowhere. Mike grew worried. Do you think they'll find us up here? Katie shrugged. Hard to say. If the group stays small, we should be fine. But if it gets any bigger, then it's anybody's guess. The prospect of having the same enemy that Mike had spent all day trying to evade just down the road was unsettling. But he wasn't going to make this a bigger deal than was necessary, because he knew that he needed to keep a calm head before jumping to conclusions. So what do you think we should do? Mike asked. Katie chortled. We're not in front of everyone else right now, so you don't have to pretend to value my opinion. That wasn't an act, Mike said. Whatever you say. Hey. Mike stepped in front of his sister. I'm serious. I came here because I didn't know where else to go. I didn't know who else could help me protect my family, and I would like to hear your thoughts on the matter. Katie didn't smile, but the scowl that seemed to have become a permanent fixture on her face softened, and Mike counted the small victory. Well, Katie said, trying to reset her face so that Mike couldn't see how his words had affected her. We'll need to keep an eye on their movements in town. I checked a few hours ago, but I wanted to get a better look as the sun was going down to see where they put everyone. Mike frowned. Put everyone? They rounded up everyone from their homes and then put them to work, Katie said. Mike glanced up at the sky. How long will it take to get down there? With you, about an hour. Then we better get moving, Mike said. Chapter 19. Katie allowed Mike to borrow a small pack and a rifle from her arsenal, which she made sure to keep under lock and key. She also made sure that the only people that were allowed to have guns was herself and Mike. No one else was to be armed unless required by an emergency situation, and only Katie could declare such an emergency. While the pair were gone, Lisa was left in charge, though there wasn't much for them to do. Katie had already completed most of her chores for the day, but she made sure to let everyone know that they would be pitching in to help in the morning, which started before dawn. Alone on the trail with his sister, the pair fell into a comfortable silence. But while Mike didn't mind the silence, he was hoping to use the time as an opportunity to talk. You really like it out here, Mike said. Yep, Katie replied. Mike walked behind her, trying to keep up with her quick pace, and waited for the path to widen before he sidled up next to her. You go into town a lot. Only when I need to check the mail, Katie answered, or if I'm running low on certain luxury items that I can't make myself. And, judging from her attire and her lifestyle, Mike surmised that there wasn't much his sister couldn't make on her own. Are you close with any of the people down there? Mike asked. I'm not close to anyone, Mike, Katie answered. And I know what you're doing. What am I doing? You're trying to break the ice, loosen me up. Katie looked at him. But I don't want to catch up. I don't want to know how you're doing, or what you've been up to. I don't care about that stuff anymore. I haven't cared about it for a long time. She faced forward again and gestured to the woods that surrounded them. This is my world. Out here, it's quiet enough to hear my own thoughts, and those are the only ones that concern me. Mike had worried a lot about his sister when she had first moved out here. He had worried that she would get sick and have no one to help her get better. He worried about someone coming after her in the middle of the night while she slept. He worried if she would starve or die of exposure. He had lost a lot of sleep because of her over the years, and now he wondered why he had wasted so much of that time on her now. I killed men in the city, Mike said, deciding to change the subject. Katie turned toward her brother, surprised by the revelation. How many? 2, Mike answered. I haven't really had any time to process it. I haven't even told Lisa about it yet, because the moment I got home... He shook his head, stopping himself. It doesn't matter. I think I just needed to say it out loud, so it didn't keep bouncing around in my head and driving me crazy. Silence fell between them again for a little while longer, but finally Katie spoke. I'm sorry you had to do that, Katie said. Killing isn't easy. No, Mike said. It's not. Not even when the person you killed deserved it. Not even when you were trying to protect yourself against all the odds, you versus them. And you know that if you die, then there won't be anyone to take care of your family. He stared down at his boots, the sweat stinging in his eyes, and he quickly wiped it away. The first time I killed anyone overseas was during a rescue operation in Afghanistan, Katie said. A group of Marines had gotten pinned down, was surrounded by the enemy. Ground forces didn't have time to pick them up before they were dead, but flying in was risky too. Command decided to approve the mission, and my team went up. Mike watched his sister as she told the story. He had never heard her talk about her time overseas in the military. When she came back from her tour, she didn't re-enlist, and that was when she started to isolate herself more. It was nighttime, so we thought that would help provide cover, Katie said. Anyway, we landed and the enemy was closer than we thought. Gunfire almost tore apart the chopper, and we had to carry the wounded on board. It was hard getting a grip on some of them because there was so much blood. She stared down at her hand, and Mike wondered if she could still see the blood. He knew he could if he closed his eyes. I was on point for cover on the last run back, and one of the insurgents managed to sneak up from behind. He didn't have a gun on him, but he had both of his hands high above his head. He was screaming something in Farsi, and he was heading right for the chopper. He was a makeshift suicide bomber. I raised my rifle to shoot, but I froze before I pulled the trigger. I don't know why I did that, but something came over me. Maybe it was the blood I saw or all the wounded that I helped carry onto the chopper for evac. But when I stared into the man's eyes through the scope of my rifle, I saw the enemy up close. We talk about the enemy all the time in briefings and around the camp, but it was always hypothetical. At least it felt that way to me. But when I finally saw the enemy up close, when he was running toward me, with the full intention of killing me, and everyone on my team, I still hesitated. I ended up getting the shot off in time, and the grenades exploded near his body. We joked that the family would have to bury him in pieces. While I laughed along with everyone else to pretend I was normal, when we got back to base, I locked myself in an outhouse that had been roasting shit all day and cried. I don't think I ever cried so hard as I did that night. And for what? Because I shot some terrorist that wanted to kill me? Because I ended someone's life before they could end mine? It didn't make any sense to me then. But after being out there alone with really nothing else to do but think, I managed to come to terms with the fact that killing, no matter who it is or why, takes a toll on the soul of the person who performs the killing. It stains you. And while the stain does fade, it never really goes away. It's part of you, always. Mike stopped, and he waited for Katie to turn around. Thank you. I wasn't really trying to help, Katie said. Just thought that you should know that what you're feeling isn't unnatural. People aren't meant to kill one another. We don't have claws or thick hides. We don't have fangs or powerful jaws. We're meant to work together, to be in groups and communities. We're made to solve problems with these. She pressed her finger into her temple, then lifted the rifle in her hands. Not these. Mike stepped closer to Katie. If you think that we're supposed to be in groups, then why did you come out here to be all alone? Why didn't you come to stay with Lisa and me and the kids? I offered to put you up until you figured things out. Katie nodded, but looked away. I know you did. But other things happened over there that I still hadn't figured out how to deal with. I'm not sure I've even done it now. I just know that the only thing I wanted was to be alone. She shrugged. And then I guess I just got used to it. Seeing his sister like this, hearing her talk in length about her experiences, it made him want to hold her, to reach out and tell her that everything was going to be all right, and she didn't have to work through her pain alone. But Mike knew that they hadn't repaired their relationship in that way yet, and he knew that this moment was a good milestone for them. He didn't want to ruin that by pushing it too far. Katie finally broke the silence, since Mike didn't know what else to do. Shouldn't be much further. Come on, I want to make sure we still have some light so we can see what they're doing. With the conversation behind them, their pace quickened, and Mike found himself lighter on his feet. He wasn't sure if it was the admission of the killing or the fact that he was getting his second wind. But Mike was glad to have his mind cleared, and some of his energy returned. With a faster pace, it didn't take long for them to reach the town, and Katie brought Mike over to a cluster of bushes that they used as cover. When they first sat down and Mike glanced at the town, he didn't see anything out of the ordinary. But Katie only pressed her fingers to her lips, then pointed back to the town. Just watch. And so Mike did. He watched the town for a long time, and then noticed two men step out of a building. The distance made it difficult to see. But when he peered through the scope on his rifle, he saw the pistols strapped to their waist. But it was when he looked at their faces that he was surprised. "They're Americans," Mike said, then peeled his eye off the scope and turned to his sister. "They're working with the people who set off the EMP?" Katie nodded. "Who else have you seen?" Mike asked. Katie shrugged. "It's a mixed bag." Mike returned his attention to the people down below. He couldn't believe that people from his own country would want to harm it like they had done. It was unthinkable, maddening. "Mike," Katie said, gently placing her hand on his arm, "why don't you take your finger off the trigger, and we take a moment to think about what we're going to do, all right?" Mike glanced down, not realizing that his finger was on the trigger. He quickly removed it. "We'll need to get a closer look if we want to really know what they're doing. Is there any other vantage point we can use?" "Yes," Katie answered, "but you need to be dead quiet." The pair remained low on their approach, and Mike mirrored Katie's movements. "Ask and you shall receive," Katie said, as she lay on her stomach and peered over the side of a rock that acted as their cover. From their current position, they had a clear view into the heart of the town. It was a far better angle than their previous spot. Here, Mike could see the center of the enemy's operations. "Looks like they're gathering supplies," Mike said. "They've been raiding nearby houses all day," Katie said. Mike frowned. It was a far different strategy than the one that he had seen used in Charlotte. In the city, the masked men fired at anything that moved. He couldn't think of a good reason why the terrorists here would be collecting the people from the town. It seemed like too much for them to take care of. Not that he thought the hostages were getting 5-star accommodations. "What else have you seen or heard?" Mike asked. "Anything out of the ordinary?" Katie shook her head. "Nothing really. I actually thought it was strange that I didn't hear more gunfire from everyone. It was like they took the town without any real violence." "The only way to pull something like that off is with people that are on the inside," Mike said. "Do you know anyone in the community that is strange, loners?" Katie's face slackened. "You're describing me." "You know what I mean," Mike said. Katie thought about it, and then she finally nodded. "Actually, yeah, I remember one guy, Tommy. He was always screaming at people. He was drunk most of the time, but he could get pretty violent and rough sometimes with the locals." "Sounds like the perfect candidate for someone to radicalize," Mike said. "Do you know where he lives?" "Other side of town," Katie answered. "But I don't know if we can get there before dark." Mike didn't like the idea of being stuck out here for so long in the middle of nowhere, but he also wanted to figure out what was going on. He hadn't been able to find answers in the city, but he might be able to find some answers out here. "Let's go," Mike said. "You're sure?" Katie asked. "Yes," Mike answered. "The more we can learn about what's happening, the better we can prepare for what they might do." Mike again followed Katie down into the town, but they made a wide loop around the south side, so not to alert any of the guards stationed on the lookout. Katie did a good job of making sure that the enemy didn't know that they were coming. Once the town was behind them, Mike saw a small cluster of mobile homes on the side of one of the hills in the area. "Not much cover for us to approach," Mike said. "It doesn't matter," Katie replied. "Tommy's place is right there." The mobile home was on the edge of a community on one of the hillsides. It was clustered around several thick shrubs, and there were plenty of places where they could sneak around. "I'll follow your lead on the way up," Mike said, "but when we get near the house, I'll take over." Katie cast him a look. "You do remember I was in the military, right?" "7 years ago," Mike answered, "and I went through my SWAT recertification 3 months ago. I'm the one who has the fresher pair of eyes and hands." Mike could tell that she wanted to protest, but she didn't. Instead, she nodded and then led the way up the mountain. Mike didn't complain on the journey up, but his legs were starting to turn to jelly. The long day had taken its toll on him. "You do stuff like this every day?" Katie glanced back at him. "You mean walking?" "I mean hiking," Mike answered through labored breaths. "Smartass." Katie stopped, and Mike nearly bumped into her. "Come on, I didn't mean—" Katie spun around and clamped her palm over Mike's mouth, pressing her finger to her lips to keep him hushed. Mike nodded and then followed Katie's finger as she pointed between a cluster of trees, northeast of their position. They were already next to Tommy's house. Mike did his best to remain quiet as they moved closer to the house. He looked for any movement in the windows and listened for any voices coming through the walls of the home. But the closer they moved toward the structure, the more Mike was convinced that there was no one home. Still, he wanted to make sure that he did his due diligence before he chalked up the mission as a loss. And he was rewarded when he heard voices. But they weren't coming from the house. They were heading toward the house. Katie tapped on Mike's shoulder and then pointed them out. 2 men were on the main dirt path that led up the hillside to the small community of mobile homes. Katie leaned closer to Mike's ear and dropped her voice to a whisper. "The one on the left is Tommy. Never seen the one on the right before." Mike watched the pair closely. Both of them were engaged in heavy conversation, but Mike wasn't close enough to hear any specifics. They stopped when they neared the walkway path that veered toward the dirt road to Tommy's house. They talked for a few more minutes, then shook hands and broke apart, Tommy heading toward his house alone. Once Tommy entered the house, Mike took a moment to take stock of the rest of the area. The homes were spread out, but if any of them were still occupied, then it wouldn't take much to alert the man's comrades. The house only had 2 points of entry from what Mike could see, a front door and a back door. If either of the entrances were locked, then they'd have to draw him out. Mike nodded, liking that plan the best. Mike turned around. "You stay here, watch me, and when you see my signal, I want you to make a noise." "What kind of noise?" "It doesn't matter." "Okay." "He'll come out to investigate, and I'll subdue him." Katie arched one eyebrow up. "Are you sure you're up for this?" "I'll be fine," Mike answered. "Just be ready." Katie nodded, and Mike made his way up toward the house. He remained hunched low on his approach and did his best to keep quiet, though he didn't have as much experience traipsing through the woods as his sister did. Mike arrived at the house unnoticed, and he positioned himself by the front door. The idea would be, When Tommy rushed outside to check on the noise, Mike would knock him out with the butt of his gun, hitting the guy as hard as he could. Once Mike was in position, he found Katie in the woods and then flashed a thumbs up. A few seconds of silence passed, and then she threw a rock at the side of the house. It cracked against the old wood, and the moment it made contact, Mike heard a commotion inside the trailer. Less than 3 seconds later, and Tommy burst out of the front door, gun in hand, and was completely blindsided by Mike, who clocked him in the forehead. The man's body went limp like a noodle, and he hit the ground. Mike then quickly glanced around and made sure that they were alone, and no one was alerted to their presence. When no one else reacted to the encounter, Mike pulled Tommy's body back inside and waited for Katie to join them. Chapter 20. Mike made sure that Tommy was tied up nice and tight and his mouth was taped shut before he dumped the bucket of water over the man's head and woke him up. Katie stood back and watched as Mike handled the interrogation. She didn't like being on the sideline, but since they were both sticking to what they knew best, Mike retained the lead on this one. Tommy blinked his eyes open, water dripping off him and onto the dirty floor. The inside of the trailer was just as disgusting and gross as the man who occupied it. But once Tommy realized he was bound, he thrashed about, screaming into the gag. Mike let the man go on about this for a little while longer, hoping Tommy would tire himself out once he realized that no amount of screaming or shouting was going to get him loose. But that took a while. "How much longer do you want to do this?" Katie asked. "How well do you know this guy?" Mike asked. "Well enough to know that he's got a pair of lungs on him," Katie answered. "We can't question him without taking the gag out, and we can't take the gag out because he'll start screaming and giving away his position the moment we do." She leaned closer to him. "We need to get him out of here and take him to the cabin." "And give away our position?" Mike asked. Katie tilted her head to the side. "Well, we wouldn't be letting him go, Mike." Mike never considered the option of killing the man, not after they had captured him. But he knew that it was something that they would have to consider. If this man had been so willing to turn against the people in his community for a group of murderous psychopaths that wanted to watch this country burn, then Tommy would have to face the consequences. Mike walked over to Tommy, the man still thrashing against his restraints and screaming into his gag, and hunched forward so he could look the man in the eyes. Tommy calmed down for a minute, but then started screaming again. "Tommy," Mike said, "you need to tell us what you're doing if you want to make sure that all parts of your body remain in working condition. Do you understand me?" Tommy quieted for a minute. Then Mike heard a very muffled "fuck you" through the gag. Mike nodded. "Okay." He bent down and started to untie Tommy's boots. "What are you doing?" Katie asked. "Hand me my rifle." Mike tugged at the boot and peeled it off of Tommy's foot. The man's foot smelled musty and sour, and the sock that Mike removed was dirtied and soaked with sweat. He grabbed his rifle from Katie and then stood. Both Katie and Tommy were baffled, but Mike offered Tommy one last chance to talk. "What are you and your comrades doing in town?" When Tommy responded with another gagged "fuck you," Mike slammed the stock of his rifle down on Tommy's foot as hard as he could. Tommy screamed through the gag, his entire body seizing up from the pain. Mike had never seen someone who had enjoyed torturing, and despite the movies, cops were never rough in the interrogation room. Everything was done by the book. But the world had changed, and it wasn't like the guy didn't have it coming. Mike waited until Tommy calmed down, and then leaned forward to get into his face once more. "All I want is answers to my questions. They're all going to be yes or no, so it'll be easy for you to answer. I ask you a question, and you either nod your head yes, or you shake your head no. If you don't answer, then I'm going to hit you again. And I'm going to keep hitting you until you do, understand? Tommy took a few deep breaths, and just when Mike thought he was going to have to hit the man's foot again, 2 of his toes already turning black and blue, Tommy nodded. Good, Mike said. Do you have more than 20 men working in the town? Tommy shook his head. More than 10, Mike asked. Tommy nodded. Mike counted up from 10 until he landed on 14. And the total number of 14 includes you? Tommy nodded. Are you expecting more people to show up? Mike asked. Tommy nodded. Today? Nothing. Tomorrow? Nope. 2 days from now. Tommy nodded. 2 days from now. Okay, good. Now, I've reached the point where I need to undo your gag, Tommy. But our agreement is still in place. You scream, you act out, and I break the rest of your toes and crunch your foot until the bones have turned to dust. Got it? Tommy nodded. Mike was careful when he removed the gag and kept the rifle poised to strike should Tommy not hold up his end of the deal. But Mike was relieved to find Tommy didn't act out. What the fuck is wrong with you, man? Tommy asked, his face dripping with sweat. And then he turned his attention to Katie. I know you. Shit. You're that crazy woman that lives up in the trees. People have been looking for you. I'm glad to know that you can't find me, Katie said. What are those people doing in the town? Mike asked. We're using the town as a supply route, Tommy answered, spitting out his words between those labored breaths. Supply route for what? Katie asked. What do you think? Tommy spat the question back with petulance. For killing. For punishing everyone who did us wrong. Who's us? Mike asked. Why would Americans do this to their own people? Tommy laughed, shaking his head. We ain't people like you, or you. He looked at both Katie and Mike with accusing eyes. Some of us are white, some of us are black, some of us are brown, but none of us are like you. And what are you? Mike asked. We're anyone that's fed up, Tommy answered. And then he smiled, a hint of joy breaking through the pain. We finally got the upper hand, he laughed. Oh boy, did we ever. He laughed harder. Look at all of you now, running around with your heads cut off. How did you do it? Katie asked. I don't know the specifics, Tommy answered. I'm just a foot soldier, a man who saw an opportunity and took it, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat. What kind of supplies are your people bringing through here? Mike asked. Food, water, guns, medicine, Tommy answered. Anything that we can take away from people like you and keep for ourselves. We've got little stations like this all over the country. There are thousands of us living in communities. We're your friends, your family, your neighbors and coworkers. We're everywhere, and we're going to win. Win what? Mike asked, unable to grasp the desires of a madman. The war, Tommy answered. You're a fool if you think that a few thousand people can overthrow this country, Katie said. Once we get communications back up. And how long do you think that'll take? Tommy asked, growing aggressive. It hasn't even been a day, and look at what people have done to one another. He turned to Mike. You've seen it, haven't you? Death, chaos. People are out to save themselves. It's hard to defeat a country. Easier to beat smaller groups. And by the time the military can communicate with one another about what's going on, the people in this country will have done most of the hard work for us, tearing each other apart. And sure, you might kill some of us every day, but so long as one of us is still alive, then the war will never be over. And that's how we win. We win by never losing. Mike stepped away from Tommy, his mind reeling. The country had already suffered a terrible blow. He had seen it firsthand in the city. People had lost their minds, and the death toll was probably already somewhere in the millions. And that number would climb rapidly over the next several days and weeks. No one had been ready, and they knew that. The sound of choking pulled Mike out of his own terrible thoughts, and he looked over to find Tommy with his throat slit. Katie wiping the blade on the man's shirt to clean it of the blood before she placed the blade back into its sheath. "What are you doing?" Mike asked. "We got what we needed from him," Katie answered. "We couldn't let him live, you knew that." "You might have told us more," Mike said. "We could have." "We learned what we needed to learn," Katie said. Her eyes grew cold and hard. "He told us what he knew, and we've stayed here longer than I wanted to. People might be expecting him back, and I don't want us to be here when they come looking for him." Katie shouldered Mike on her way to the door. Mike turned back to Tommy. His head slumped forward and the front of his shirt covered in blood. It took a moment for him to come to terms with what his sister had just done. She had murdered someone. But so had he. Apparently, this was the way of the world now. Chapter 21. It had been an interesting journey for Melvin once he left the detective's house, where he had his share of fun with some of the neighbors that had rallied against Michael Thornton. And while Melvin might have shared Michael as a common enemy with those bottom feeders that the detective called his neighbors, he needed to focus on his larger mission. But that didn't mean he couldn't have more fun along the way. It had been a bloody journey from Charlotte as he made his way west toward the P.O. box number that he had traced to the small town where the detective's sister lived, or at least lived nearby. He had borrowed a map from one of Michael's neighbors, but he had the unfortunate audacity to bleed all over it after Melvin jammed a pin into the side of the man's neck. Melvin rolled his eyes. People. But despite the flecks of blood that hindered his path on the map, Melvin made good time. He had picked up a bicycle, which he used to move faster down roads that had been clogged with traffic and broken-down vehicles. But the further west that he rode, the less traffic that he encountered, and he knew that he was getting close to finding his prey. He had also learned that he wasn't the only predator lurking about in the world. The men that Melvin had seen in the city seemed to be sprinkled throughout the countryside. He hadn't bothered engaging with these people because he had no desire to press his luck. From what he had seen in the city, they held the mentality of shoot first and ask questions later. With Melvin's MO of talking to his victims before killing them, he knew that they would have conflicting ideologies. A sign for the town was up ahead, and Melvin decided to ditch the bike and go the rest of the trip on foot. If the detective was nearby, he didn't want to draw attention to himself by sticking to the main roads. He wanted to make sure that his arrival in town was a surprise. Sticking to the trees off the road, Melvin saw the town up ahead. From what he could see from his current position, the place looked deserted. But the closer he moved toward the town, he saw that it was guarded. At first glance, Melvin believed that this little community had banded together, fighting against the enemy that had descended upon the country, slaughtering innocents. But upon closer inspection, Melvin saw only a few people in the town, the rest being pushed into one building. He realized that the men herding the masses were the same kind of men that Melvin had encountered in Charlotte. Had the detective fled trouble, only to be captured by the people when he arrived? Melvin hoped not. If so, his new game would be over before it began. Melvin was about to descend back onto the road and cross down below to the other side to get a better look, and sneak his way up into the town when he saw a pair of bodies dart across the road and disappear into the woods near him. Melvin ducked and flattened himself against the earth. He had become a natural at blending in, becoming a ghost when he needed to. It was how he had evaded capture for so long. But as he watched the pair move closer to him, Melvin almost blew his own cover when he saw who it was. The detective. He was with another woman, and judging by their resemblance, Melvin would have bet his last dollar that the woman was the sister that had sent the letter. They were moving quickly through the woods, and it took all of Melvin's willpower not to get up and immediately follow him. But he had picked up a few skills in tracking people through the woods. Sometimes it was fun to let his victims run and think that they could escape. Melvin waited until the pair had gained a bit of a head start, and then he sprinted after them. He wandered through the woods for a while, but he finally saw the backs of their heads as they trudged up the mountain. Melvin was downwind, so he doubted there was any chance that he could give away his position, unless they had a dog's hearing. But he was able to hear snippets of their conversation. They were talking about the men in town, something about their supplies and the captured townspeople, which made Melvin smile. Even in the grips of chaos, the detective still couldn't deny his true nature to help people. It was what made them such a perfect match. Two forces on opposite sides of the law, and they were about to crash into one another for an epic battle. Melvin maintained his safe distance for the next hour, climbing the mountain, unsure of where they were heading. They had traveled far away from the town, and Melvin wasn't sure where they would be going that was so far away from the rest of civilization. Along the way, Melvin noticed the sister taking the lead and how she weaved around certain areas, careful to step over some invisible line. For a long time, this confused Melvin until he stumbled upon one of her traps. Melvin caught sight of the tripwire only seconds before he was about to step down on it. He slowly, carefully removed his foot and bent down to examine the wire, which ran 5 yards east to west. He followed the wire to the mine, hidden beneath leaves and dirt. "Clever," Melvin said, a smile on his face. These were the same kind of weapons Melvin had found on the terrorists. It seemed the detective's sister was better prepared than most. Melvin continued following the detective, but was much more conscious about his steps. Even with the slower pace, he managed to keep up with his prey. And when he saw the small cabin in the clearing ahead, Melvin brightened with pleasure. It wasn't just the detective that was at the cabin, but his entire family. Wife, kids, even a few friends. Melvin was going to have fun. A lot of fun. Chapter 22. It was Mike, Lisa, Katie, and Nasir in a circle. Everyone huddled close while Mike explained what they found in town. Adults only. For now, he wanted to keep the kids out of any plans they came up with. He wasn't sure that would last forever, but he wanted to protect them from what the world had become for as long as he could. And once Mike had said his piece, the response he received from his wife was one that surprised him. "You can't help those people," Lisa said. "What are you talking about?" Mike asked. "Those are the same terrorists that I saw in Charlotte, the same people that are attacking, slaughtering innocent civilians. We have to help them." "How?" Lisa asked. "You said there were 14 people guarding the town." 13, Katie said. 13, Lisa said. 13 people against you two? How would that even work? "They're comfortable," Mike said. "This is the first time that I have seen any of them in one place, and they haven't killed anyone, which means that they might be waiting to use those people as leverage or torture them or use them as some kind of cheap labor." He shut his eyes, knowing that he was getting worked up, and took a breath to calm down. "And the bigger problem is that they have people trying to find Katie. They know that she lives somewhere up on the mountain, but they just don't know where yet. and they want to completely secure the area before they expand. So if we can stop them before more of them show up, we increase our chances of survival." "How much longer is this going to last?" Lisa asked. "Can't we just wait them out?" "It could take over a year," Katie answered. "With the sheer amount of infrastructure that has been destroyed because of the EMP, it has crippled everything. It took our country over 200 years to get to this point. It's going to take some time before we see any semblance of normal." Lisa deflated. It was difficult news to hear, but they all needed to hear it. The future had transformed into a place of hard truths, and if they couldn't face those facts without conviction, then they weren't going to make it very far in the long run. All that mattered now was making sure that they survived. That was key. "We would be safer in the long run if we eliminated any nearby threats now," Nasir said. The answer surprised Mike. Since the man was a doctor, he thought that the idea of killing went against his moral code. "I agree with Mike," Nasir said, "if I even get a vote." Lisa sighed, shaking her head. "I don't know about this." "Lisa," Katie said, "I understand that you're concerned. I am too. This isn't a plan that I want to pursue. But the fact of the matter is people are looking for me. And the moment they find out where I am, they find out where you and the kids are. And I don't want anything to happen to them. At the very least, if we go after them now, we have the element of surprise. But if we wait until they stumble upon the cabin, then we'll be pushed up against the wall. And I don't think that's a fight we'll be able to win." Mike braced himself for the torrent of vehement language that he knew his wife would unleash on a woman whom she didn't care for very much. But he was surprised to see Lisa only nod in agreement. But she still wasn't happy about it. "Fine," Lisa said. "I need to get dinner ready." "Use whatever you need to in the pantry," Katie said. "I can help if—" "No, I'll take care of it," Lisa said. "You two have work to do." Lisa departed for the kitchen. Mike turned his focus on Nasir. "I want you to stay behind," Mike said. "I can fight," Nasir said. "And it's the least that I can do after what you've done for my daughters and me. I owe you." Mike placed his hands on Nasir's shoulder. "It's not that I don't want you to fight. Lord knows that we could use the extra manpower. But you're a doctor, and your mind is far more valuable to us than your trigger finger right now. If one of us gets hurt, then you could fix it. If you get hurt, we're all screwed." Mike hoped that the logic would sneak its way into Nasir's mind, and the man finally acquiesced to the plan. Nasir returned to his girls, and Mike turned to his sister. "So how do you think we should play this?" Mike asked. "Asking for my advice now, are you?" Katie asked. "I told you that we need to stick with the experts and what we do best," Mike said. "And this is a war. I've never been in one, but you have, so how do we fight them?" Katie nodded, and then gestured toward the front porch. "Let's talk outside. I need a smoke." Mike followed his sister outside and leaned up against the railing, as Katie pulled a smoke from her pocket and lit up. "When did you start smoking?" Mike asked. "I've always smoked," Katie answered, taking a puff. "I was just really good at hiding it." Mike nodded. "You've gotten good at hiding lots of things over these past few years." Smoke from the tip of the cigarette drifted lazily up over Katie's face, making her expression hazy and nuanced. She didn't look like the young sister that he remembered growing up with. She had truly become a stranger to him, a woman whom he didn't know. "I know it bothered you," Katie said, "me leaving." "It bothered more than just me," Mike replied. "It bothered the whole family." Katie took another drag, nodding along. "Yeah, maybe." "No maybe about it," Mike said. "My kids loved you. You had a great relationship with Lisa. Hell, I thought we had a good relationship. And then you just leave, abandoning us out of nowhere, and I still don't understand why." Katie lowered her gaze to the wood floors, still puffing on her smoke. She was quiet for a long time, but when she finally spoke, her voice was quiet and small, like he remembered when she was little and really scared. "Dad disowned me," Katie said. "After I came back from Afghanistan, that's why I took off." She took another smoke, still staring at the floor. Mike winced. "What? Why did he disown you?" "I told him about what happened," Katie said, "over there." She finally looked up at him. "Are you talking about the stuff that happened when you hesitated with the chopper team?" Mike asked. "Katie, that's nothing to be ashamed about." "It wasn't that." Katie shook her head, and she scuffed her heel against the floor, growing agitated. "It was about something else. Something worse. Much worse." Mike's stomach started to hollow out, the way it did when he got nervous, and his mouth dried up. "Katie, what happened? What aren't you telling me?" Katie took one last puff on the cigarette and then flicked the butt out into the dirt. "Nothing, forget it." She made a beeline for the door, head down, but Mike grabbed her arm and pulled her back before she could escape. "Get off me!" "No!" Mike shouted, his tone harsher than he intended, and when he saw her wince, he softened. "There isn't anything that you can't tell me, you know that. We've always been that way ever since we were little, remember, no secrets." Katie crossed her arms, hugging herself, and her eyes reddened. She sniffled and then quickly wiped her nose. "Katie," Mike said, "please, talk to me." And then the dam finally broke loose. Katie scrunched her face as she cried, and she instinctively leaned into her brother, who placed gentle hands around her back. They stayed like that for a long time, and it was only after the tears had run their course that she finally broke free. It took a moment for her to calm down, and Mike said nothing as he waited. Finally, she spoke. "I was raped," Katie said, "when I was on my tour." The words lingered in the air for a moment, Mike hearing them, but his mind refusing to accept their truth. "What?" Mike asked. How did that happen?" Katie kept her arms around herself, keeping her eyes on the ground. "It was on base one night. I had a few drinks with some of the guys from my platoon. I guess I had one too many because I stumbled back to my barracks and passed out." She took a breath and then exhaled. "But I woke up in the middle of the night and my pants were down, and there was—" She shut her eyes. "There was a man on top of me." Mike clenched his fists, squeezing his hands so tight that his knuckles popped. "I tried to fight him off, but I was too tired," Katie said. "I tried to yell for help, but no one came." And then he finished and left. Her eyes widened, and she stared ahead, her expression stoic. I lay there for a long time, crying. It wasn't until morning, when I was supposed to report to duty, that anyone came looking for me. I'd cleaned myself up by then, which I later realized was a mistake. She frowned. "I just wanted to get his stink off me, so I took a shower." Mike remained silent. He had questions, but he wouldn't ask anything until he was sure that she had said her piece. But in the gaps of silence, dark thoughts filled his mind, all of them about what he would do to the man who did that to his sister. "I reported what happened," Katie said. "Did the rape kit, but some of the evidence wasn't conclusive since I took a shower. I tried pushing it up the chain of command, but no one wanted to hear about it. The military doesn't like to ruffle feathers. And the last thing they wanted to do was start an expensive hearing. With so much pushback, I dropped it. But I was able to get a psychological discharge. And that's when I came home and spoke to Dad." She cleared her throat. "I told him what happened. And he didn't believe me. He said that I was just looking for attention, like I always do." Mike's mouth hung open for a long time. He struggled to find the words. He didn't know what to say. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was so angry," Katie answered. "I couldn't believe he thought that I would lie about something like that. I mean, I know I got into some trouble in high school, but I wasn't that person anymore, you know?" Mike reached for his sister's hand and squeezed. "I'm so sorry." "I just know how close you were with him," Katie said. "And I thought it would be better if I just left without causing more trouble than I already caused." "Hey," Mike said. "That wouldn't have been trouble. You did nothing wrong." "Yeah," Katie said. "I know that now, but it took a long time for me to get there." She glanced out to the woods, the last bits of the day fading away. "It was nice being out here. It gave me time to reflect. Think about what happened." She turned back to Mike. "I wanted to come back for the funeral, for you, but I just couldn't. And now you know why." Mike nodded. "Thank you for telling me, and I'm sorry for being so hard on you. If I had known—" "It's okay, Mikey," Katie said. "I know you're not the bad guy. Neither was Dad, really. He was just afraid to rock the boat, even if it meant covering up something bad." Mike wanted to talk to her more about it, but she looked so tired and exhausted that he didn't press the issue. She eventually got up and headed for the door. "We still need to plan for the morning," Katie said. "I think we should try and hit them at first light." Mike nodded. "That's a good idea. They'll be the most vulnerable then." But Mike had no idea how he was supposed to plan an attack tomorrow, after what he had just heard. Chapter 23. It didn't take long for Katie to map out their strategy. She had been to the town enough times that she had a good idea of where everything was located. Their plan was simple. Katie would plant explosives around the town, causing a distraction, and when the bad guys rushed out of the buildings and sprinted toward the trouble, she would take them out with a rifle. While Katie was shooting the bad guys, Mike would sneak into the library where they were holding everyone hostage, and arm as many of them with guns to fight back. But Katie made sure to hammer home one very important detail. None of the enemies escaped. If any of the terrorists in the town managed to flee, then they would be able to alert any nearby cells about what happened, drawing more attention to their area. "Are you going to be okay with that?" Katie asked. Mike wasn't sure how he felt about executing people. But there were no jails to house any prisoners, and no court system to prosecute them. Killing the enemy was the cleanest approach. "I'll do what needs to be done." "Good," Katie said. "And listen, when you go to grab the people in the library, you want to find Mark Thompson. He's the closest thing to a mayor the town has, and if people are reluctant to help, then he'll help talk them into it." Katie yawned when they finished and wiped her eyes. "I'm going to sleep. I'll be up early to get everything ready." "Okay," Mike said. "Just wake me up when you're up." Katie flashed a thumbs up and then disappeared to her bedroom. They had planned everything in the kitchen, and Mike sat there alone for a little while, still trying to wrap his head around what happened to his sister. How could his father have said something like that? He knew that Katie wasn't lying about what happened. Was his father really that scared? Was he really that frightened that they would get so much bad press that it would ruin their family name? Mike rubbed his eyes. The day had caught up with him, but his mind was still spinning with questions that needed answers. Mike got up and stepped quietly through the living room where his family and Nasir's family occupied, sleeping bags on the floor. Everyone had passed out an hour ago, exhausted from the day's events. Mike walked into his mother's room and gently sat on the edge of her mattress. She was asleep, so still and quiet and small. He reached for her hand and held it in his own. She had always been a small woman, very petite. But seeing her current state on the bed, she didn't look like she would make it through the night. But then, between two sharp, shallow breaths, Mike watched as his mother cracked her eyelids open. They fluttered for a moment. At first glance, Mike thought she was having a seizure, but she was only shaking off the heavy sleep that she had fallen into. After Martha was able to hold her eyes open for longer than a few seconds, she finally set her gaze on her son, and she winced as she struggled to open her mouth. "What?" She shut her mouth and swallowed, unable to finish the word. Mike grabbed the water glass from the nightstand and then brought it to his mother's lips, and she drank greedily from the cup. The water spilled over the sides of her mouth, and she coughed after a few gulps, spraying more water over the front of her. Mike set the glass aside and then used the edge of the bedsheet to wipe up the water. When he was finished, he reached for her hand again and felt her reciprocate the squeeze. But it was weak, very, very weak. "What happened?" Martha asked, struggling to stay awake. "You were shot," Mike answered. "But we got you all fixed up. All you have to worry about is resting now." Martha stared at Mike for a moment, then glanced to the rest of her surroundings. She looked confused, then worried. "Where am I?" Mike had come in here to find comfort, but the last thing that he wanted to do was make his own mother uncomfortable about their situation. But he also wanted answers to what happened. And despite his positive outlook for his mother's recovery, if she died, then everything that she knew went with her. And Mike needed to know. He needed to understand. "We're at Katie's cabin," Mike said. He waited for how she would react, and he suspected that if she hadn't been so injured, he would have seen a more exaggerated expression from her. But she was hurt and weak and tired. Martha nodded and then exhaled a sigh. "Mom," Mike said, still holding her hand. "Katie told me what happened between her and Dad." He studied her carefully, looking for any tells or micro-expressions, but she remained stoic. Did you know about what happened to her and how Dad reacted?" Martha was quiet for a long time. She simply stared up at the ceiling, not looking at Mike, and just when he thought she was going to fall back asleep, she closed her eyes and spoke. "Your father was a complicated man. A man that came from a different time." Mike let go of his mother's hand. "Oh my God, so you did know? You knew what he said after Katie told him what happened overseas?" Martha licked her lips, most of her concentration on her breathing and staying awake. "I wasn't in the room when they discussed it, and when I tried talking to Katie about it, she shut me out. I didn't learn about what really happened until after she left. I had to pull it out of your father, and you know how difficult something like that was with him." Mike did know. Getting his father to open up and talk about anything that didn't involve work or cars was like trying to crack the safe at Fort Knox. "Did you try and convince him to call her, to try and make it right?" "Of course I did," Martha said. "But where do you think Katie got her stubborn side? The man was a mountain when he didn't want to do something. He couldn't be moved. I would have had better luck negotiating peace in the Middle East." Mike shook his head, dumbfounded. He lowered his head and rubbed his eyes, a sour pit forming in his stomach. God, how could Dad do something like that? He popped his head up. I mean, I know he could be strong-willed, but over something like this? He stood, his voice growing louder without his intention. Martha tried to reach for Mike's hand, but he was too far out of reach, and she didn't have the strength to try and reach him. "Michael, sit down, please." Mike didn't want to sit down. He wanted to drive his fist through the wall. He wanted to scream. He wanted to be able to speak to his father one last time so that he could give the old man a piece of his mind. He was angry, and he needed to direct that anger somewhere before he exploded. But it was the sound of his mother's voice that pulled him back from the edge. The way that it always did whenever he felt that uncontrollable anger course through him. The real bad stuff that he could normally keep at bay. There were only two people that could talk him down when he got like that. The first person was his mother. The second was his wife. "I need to talk to you, Michael," Martha said. "Sit down, please." Mike finally rejoined his mother on the bed and then allowed her to place her hand on his own hand. Sitting there as a grown man, he suddenly felt like he was 8 years old again, waiting for his mother to tell him that everything was going to be okay. It was funny how that need never disappeared, no matter how old you grew. "What your father said and did was terrible," Martha said. "And no one let him know that more than I did when I finally learned the truth. I don't know why he couldn't just admit he made a mistake. Maybe because he was too old or too embarrassed or too scared. I think he was afraid that if he had done something about it, then that meant the horrible thing that happened to his daughter was real. That Katie was raped, and that the men who did that to her were still walking free. And he just couldn't accept that fact. He wasn't strong enough to bear that burden." "That's no excuse," Mike said, his eyes reddening and growing wet. "He should have done something. I would have done something if that happened to Kelly. I wouldn't have even hesitated." "I know, sweetheart," Martha said. "I know. But you are a stronger man than your father was. You're a better man. And he helped raise you to be that way. Don't forget that." Mike knew that she was right, but at that moment it didn't matter. He was still mad and was going to allow himself to stay mad. "When he was sick," Martha said, "he told me that he was glad that he was suffering. He said that it was his penance for not doing anything when Katie came to him for help." A tear fell from the corner of her eye and rolled over the wrinkles of her cheek. "He might have done something bad, Michael, but he regretted it in the end. He really did. And by the time he wanted to make it right, Katie didn't want to hear any part of it." "And how was she supposed to handle it, Mom?" Mike asked. "I don't blame her for not wanting to listen," Martha answered. "I just wanted my family to be together again. I just wanted us all to heal from those old wounds." Martha shut her eyes, and one more tear fell. But a few seconds after that, and she was back asleep. What little bit of strength that she managed to conjure was gone. Mike gently removed his hand and then stood. He watched her for a little while longer before he left the room and joined his wife on the floor in their sleeping bag. Mike lay awake for a while, his mind reeling from the events of the day and everything that he had learned. Even though he knew that he needed to rest, he wasn't sure if he was going to be able to fall asleep the way his mind and body were still wired. But when Lisa rolled against him and placed her arm over his stomach, it was the warmth of her body that overpowered the thoughts racing through his mind, and he drifted into a sleep. Soundless sleep. Sleep eluded Melvin most of the night. His mind just wouldn't stop racing, and he couldn't get comfortable sleeping on the hard, cold ground. He managed to pilfer some camping supplies on his journey, but the sleeping bag and extra blanket did little to protect him from the elements. But it wasn't the first night that Melvin had to spend outdoors. When he was younger, he hid from his stepfather's violent temper, and the safest place he could find was in the woods behind his house. Melvin's stepfather would come home in a drunken rage, looking for a fight. But Melvin learned quickly to already be long gone by the time that mean bastard came home. It was his mother who never learned the lesson. She took the abuse, and then the next morning made his breakfast with a side of fresh bruises for her trouble. But those days were long gone. He no longer hid from the hunter. He was the hunter. Melvin had kept a close eye on the cabin, but he also maintained a safe distance. It was difficult for him to stay back and not swoop into the cabin in the middle of the night and slaughter everyone while they slept. But after the trap that he found in the surrounding woods, he wasn't sure what else the detective's sister had up her sleeve. She was smart to have booby-trapped the area, creating her own security system. Melvin had only missed the trap by blind luck, and so he stayed put. And it had proven helpful. Melvin studied the family. He watched them move, listened to their conversations. He wasn't able to hear all of what they said, but he caught enough to piece together what he had missed. The detective and his sister were going to attempt to go down into the town and set the people free. It was a noble act, but then again, the detective was a noble man. And the detective's crusade ended up providing the perfect cover for Melvin's plans. Because he couldn't sleep, Melvin spent most of the night preparing for his fun with the detective. He had a few ideas of what he wanted to do, but not all of the supplies to make his vision come alive. But a quick trip into town under the cover of darkness easily fixed those problems as he slipped past the guards on duty, neither of them alert or wakeful. Once Melvin rounded out his supplies, adding what he gathered from the town to the weapons in his pack, he pilfered from the terrorists in Charlotte. He turned his attention to the woods. He wanted to become as familiar with the area as possible. Melvin's eyes adjusted quickly to the darkness, and it didn't take long for him to understand the appeal of the area. There were so many different places to play. The first was a set of caves, which he nearly got lost in trying to explore in the dark. They were too tantalizing not to use, and he made sure that he could find his way back to them again. The second location was a sharp cliff looking over the side of a canyon. It had the perfect kind of ledge to dangle something or someone off of. And the final location was a pit. The area had steep walls on every side. It was the perfect place to set an ambush. It was an area where Melvin would be able to take his time with the detective. He could savor the moment, savor the kill, and make sure there was plenty of time to make him feel every ounce of pain. Satisfied with his scouting work, Melvin returned to his position outside of the cabin to wait until it was his moment to enact his revenge.